Welcome, Gyno-Curious listeners. I am Dr. Amy Novat. We are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. My perimenopause was not easy. As a physician and someone who chats with women every day about this transition and think of it as a very natural shift in the life of a woman, I thought I would handle it with grace and acceptance. But I must say, there were times when I thought I would lose my mind. I needed cold cloths against my neck while operating to avoid fainting. Sleep interrupted impacted my mood and energy. Changes in libido and vagina as my skin and vaginal tissue got drier, impacting sex. So now that I'm beyond that transition, I thought it best to invite Allison Chawla, a woman in the midst of her perimenopause, back to the show to further discuss the perimenopause and her experience with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Welcome, Allison, a Rhiniecliff native, a mom of 2 daughters, a therapist and a certified coach, an alternative healer who has trained both Eastern and Western practices.
Thank you. So happy to be back.
I'm so glad to have you. So our first conversation was an intro into the perimenopause, and I thought today we'd continue that conversation,
Sure.
but then perhaps spiral into a place of just talking about transitions. And it feels like in my practice, I'm so often talking about transitions,
Yes.
change.
Yes.
And one of the highlights about the perimenopause is the unexpected, or the unpredictable is a better word, changes that can occur in our mind, in our body, in our soul around this time.
Yes.
So I want to just begin to talk about that. And I guess start with your own experience around mind, body, soul changes that might be or may not be happening
They're
for
happening.
you. Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, but I giggled when you said we can start spiraling because I thought I am particularly good at that at this point in life, especially in the middle of the night. But no, I absolutely, and that was one of the things that indicated that I was in that phase of life. I would sit and be, there are moments where I'm thinking about things or overthinking about things, but I'm generally not a spiraling individual. And I started to do that spiraling and that just thinking and worrying and contemplating things that hadn't even occurred, essentially making up fiction in my mind and working through these scenarios. And I thought, what the hell is going on? Is this a pandemic thing? Is this a maternal thing? Am I worrying? But then I, again, put all the puzzle pieces together and realized, like, oh, this is a lovely perimenopausal thing, as is the forgetfulness.
Yeah, women talk to me about that kind of all the time, right? And it's very alarming initially because so many of us have been blessed with a inquisitive mind, an
Right.
organized mind,
Yes.
and one that we can rely on, of course. And
Yes.
then there's this transition in the hormonal environment where progesterone starts to diminish, our estrogen levels are wavering, and we're not ovulating as often. And it creates this tableau of experiences, signs, and symptoms that can be challenging. And again, one of those is the change in the mind. And it's so interesting to me because I often think about the spiral as a very female symbol.
I would agree. And again, there have been times in my life where I would be spiraling, and most of it was related to premenstrual syndrome and my hormone shifting. But I definitely have thought of it as more of a female, perhaps, again, I use the word maternal. We're sort of designed, I think, to keep the human race alive in many ways. But it's different. It's more, again, of this imaginary spiraling, worrying about things that haven't even happened. Or I'm sitting up and I catch myself and I wonder, what the hell am I thinking about? And that's when the memory loss is beneficial because then I don't worry about what I'm spiraling about. But it's definitely it's just like something that I have not experienced in life yet. I've helped people get through it, and I love and appreciate that you use the word transition because the term midlife crisis is often associated with perimenopause and menopause and anyone in middle age. And I always call it with my clients a midlife transition or a midlife awakening because there is so much that is happening that is positive, but like any change, there is loss and there is grief and there are complications, and sure as hell's happening with this too.
Yeah, there's the unknown.
Yes.
And that can be very challenging for all human beings, but I think particularly women because our lives are so organized and dependent upon, again, the choreography of our menstrual cycles, perhaps the choreography of taking care of family,
Sure.
all that goes on into our work lives, etc. So we are, we're master jugglers. We just
Yes,
are.
we are. And even though they say you cannot multitask, I know I've read a study that the brain actually doesn't multitask. It's just that some of us are faster at doing multiple things in an organized manner. And most certainly, I believe women have that
Yes.
power
Yes.
and that ability.
I often think of the old-fashioned Rolodex.
Oh, yeah.
And when I think about and pardon me, this isn't true of all, those who identify in the binary male-female, but women will turn that Rolodex so fast and take note of each card.
Oh, yeah.
Where the men in my life, the penis havers in my life, tend to move it at a slower pace. And to give them credit, they can focus and work on something without being bogged down by all the cards running through my head while I'm doing one other thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just had a conversation with a friend who's also, she's a year or two older than me. And she had said something similar that, she's a very successful woman, so accustomed to being able to do many things. And she said, but right now I feel like I'm another individual just screaming into the abyss during this phase, lost and uncertain, and think so many things are changing. So it's so impactful on women.
So I'm wondering, what is the benefit of that? For me, so much of our lives, even the hardest points in our lives, have value.
Yes.
They're teachers, right? And you know that particularly in the world that you work in. So I've often thought about and read about, what possible evolutionary benefit could the menopause be for us women? Because there's so much loss. And one of the things I've been thinking about are, again, these transitions and these stages in our lives. And I read it once, and I'm forgetting where I read it, but, there are these 3 stages in our lives where when we're young, it's all about our education. And then there's that creative phase. For many folks, it's about bearing children. And then there's this 3rd stage in our lives that we sometimes spend, if we're lucky, 20, 30 years in.
Yes.
And that's about wisdom.
Yes.
And I've never experienced wisdom without working hard towards it. So I'm trying to help women feel more positive about this transition because, again, women will come into the office feeling so depleted and so afraid of the perimenopause. And so I will acknowledge, yes, it's extremely hard to feel the foggy brain. It's extremely hard to all of a sudden feel the joints hurt. It's really hard to have these crazy periods.
Yeah.
Yes, it's hard, and we talk about ways in which to heal and go from there. But I also like to help them look at it as a transition to this place of wisdom and power and capacity.
Yes.
And, oh my God, I don't have to worry about my period anymore. I don't have to worry about getting pregnant if I'm in a heterosexual relation, all that stuff.
Yes.
So without sounding Pollyannish, because I don't want to be naive about it, at the same time, I'd like us, rather than seeing it as just a marker of getting older, of something else.
I think I mentioned this the last time that we spoke, that someone had said to me when I realized that my body was beginning to change, that women become their most prolific and their most interesting after menopause, because all of this additional time is freed up within your mind. And like I had said earlier, I don't really think midlife is a crisis or it has to be something negative. It's more of a transition, an awakening, and an opportunity to really step into yourself as an individual without having to worry about all of these things associated with the menstrual cycle, which does include, like you said, the fear of getting pregnant if you're in a heterosexual relationship or raising children. So it's almost like, there is a lot of discomfort that happens, but on the other side is that tremendous gift, that opportunity. And you said many of us live maybe 30, 40 years after the menstrual cycle ends. Like, that can be the richest point of your life. And I do believe that a lot of the concern with women about aging comes from society and what has been placed onto us, at least our aesthetic appearance. But if we're able to just observe ourselves while we're going through it, think about where it's brought us to, the gifts that we have gotten from it, and then what we can step into. It's like a new lease on life. It's a new opportunity. it doesn't have to be this like, okay, well, I'm done flowering. I'm not reproducing anymore. Might as well just cover myself in a bag and then stop taking care of myself. I really think that there is greatness on the other side of it. I always say I can't wait to, like, I hope I live to 100 because I want to be like the most eccentric, educated, fun woman because I think I have so much time coming my way.
Well, the seeds are sprouting already for you, my friend. You are all those wonderful attributes.
Thank you.
But I don't want to have women who are listening to this who are really struggling during this time hear us say that it's nothing but the glorious pathway to enlightenment.
Yes.
And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I might approach it in the office in terms of treatments, but I'd love to hear how you approach it from an emotional point of view and or Eastern, Western healing modalities, because that may be helpful to those who are listening.
Absolutely. And that's what I was I was about to say, thank you for adding that. I don't want to ignore the fact that it is, in fact, a loss. There is tremendous grief. I'm still at the early phases. I may be at 50 years old when I'm perhaps that's when I'll go through menopause, devastated while I'm going through it because, in fact, it is a loss. It is a difficult transition, but like we had mentioned, on the other side of pain tends to be a purpose or a learning experience. So I absolutely look at it that way.
Yeah, yeah. So in my office, we'll certainly start talking about ways in which to help whatever symptoms coming up. And that can include, depending upon a woman's medical history, smoking history, it may be actually initiating birth control pills, for example, some form of hormonal therapy, whether it be what's considered contraceptive or hormone replacement therapy, in an attempt to change the chaos of the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone environment during this time.
And it is so chaotic
at
times. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I can't help but using the word orchestration because I see the menstrual cycle for so many of us as a time where it's pretty predictable. And I think we spoke about this the last time where we can say, oh yeah, it's 2 days before my period. That's why I feel bloated. Or it's 1 day before my period. This is why I'm rageful.
Now my swelling is going to go down because it's the second day into my period.
Yeah. And there are certainly practitioners out there who celebrate the menstrual cycle and the lunar cycles and the power of bleeding. And it's an amazing capacity. And so when that starts to change, it's a lot of tumult for women.
Yes.
So bringing these hormones into balance, if you will, or into a more structured environment can often be very helpful. For some women, I will talk about different herbs and vitamins that can help them depending, again, what they're feeling. For some women, an antidepressant in low dosages, interestingly enough, can get rid of hot flushes, can help with sleep, can help with that foggy brain that they're experiencing that is ill-defined. So these are some of the more practical, or if you will, everyday treatments that I'll begin to talk to women about. And moreover, what's often true is what works today may not work in 6 months or may not be necessary in 6 months.
So another surprise.
Yeah, exactly.
Surprise.
And so I often say, this is just the beginning of our conversation. Please call me as you're moving through this because what's today is not necessarily tomorrow. And again, that's part of the challenge of this life experience is the unpredictability of it.
Yeah.
So what are the conversations you're having with women around their mind and the loss and perhaps some of the treatments you might recommend?
I don't ever narrate to someone what I think their experience is or should be. It's different here when you're asking me my opinion or how I feel about it personally, but I usually ask what it is to them, what it means to them, how are they feeling. I'm incredibly empathetic and sympathetic to someone that is really struggling with it, that it feels almost like a death for them, like they're going to die.
Yeah.
And so I just focus on what the emotional feeling is and get to understand it much more. And then quite like you, I poke around to see what they're comfortable with. What would you like to try? Would you like to do some energy work with me or some talking? Or do you want me to refer you out to a doctor? Do you believe in, like you said, SSRIs? Or would you like to try an acupuncturist? I get to know each individual and then I help guide them to what I think will help or hope will help. And you said, like, they can come back around and we have to make a change. But everyone is so different, not just in the treatment that they require, but in the mindset, in the experience, in the journey. And so I'm just very delicate with every single person and respect anything that they're going through.
I'm thrilled to hear that, and you're a gift to your
Thank you.
clients
Thank
because so much of what goes on in the healing world is very mechanized and
Yeah.
very proscripted.
Yes.
And certainly when you're talking to women going through this transition, it so affects women differently, individually. Yeah, there are those kind of universal themes: hot flushes, night sweats,
Yeah.
sleep changes, again, memory issues. We could make that list, and it applies to a lot of women
A lot
out there.
of women.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of women also go through a lot of grief, realizing that they can no longer reproduce, even if they don't want to have more children. But there's something that's a reoccurring variable in the office. People will say to me, it's not that I wanted another child, but knowing that I can't if I were to change my mind, or just can't because I'm a woman and that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And that is around the time where I would highlight, but let's talk about what's coming next. What can you do with the rest of your energy? There are ways to generate life that don't necessarily mean birthing a child from your body. There are many ways to inspire and be creative. And I do try to help steer them. But again, it's more about what is it you're feeling and how can we work through that feeling?
It strikes me often that this is a time where hormones are changing, but so are life issues. So the concept of not being able to bear children anymore is often coincident when children are leaving for college, where,
yes.
There's a lot of midlife events that kind of merge together and are about loss and change. And I meet women in the office who are feeling so saddened by the loss of their children to college. And the kind of empty nest.
Right.
Yeah. And what that feeling is about, and how it is like what it's like to experience kind of all these losses.
Yes. And I think when you're a parent and your purpose is essentially taking care of other human beings for decades, and then all of a sudden the house is empty, this is a very real thing. That I would consider more of a crisis-like experience, because most women that I know, and men as well, that talk about this, is that they didn't see it coming, even though they prepared for it and they intellectually knew that it was happening. But so much of their time and energy has been taken up by taking care of the children that they love, that all of a sudden it does feel like death.
Yeah.
It's like, they're gone. What do I do without them?
Yeah. I mean, all of a sudden, this major role that you've had for, 20 years, whatever, is now not so necessary on a daily basis. I mean, we all know that we never stop parenting.
Oh, yeah.
But when they're afar, it's a very different feeling and sense of self around that role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of couples have a very hard time figuring each other out as a new relationship after these transitions occur. So it's all happening around the same point in life. And that's a lot to deal with at once.
Absolutely. And then there's this thing called beauty and sexiness and seductiveness and capacity that is crashing in also.
Yes.
Where women are beginning to see lines on their faces, where they don't feel as seen when they walk into a room, where their sense of physical beauty is also shifting.
Yes, yes. And I think, again, that this is that time, and I mentioned this earlier, that we have so much pressure on us as women to be aesthetically pleasing to everyone around us. But finding a way, I mean, you can still be beautiful and have wrinkles and be gray, making yourself beautiful for who you are. And also, I call it, I joke and say, I'm going to make sure I have a secret weapon when I age. But what I mean is love for myself and confidence and maybe a new hobby, just something that I have more time for, because it is a natural progression. We are supposed to age. We're supposed to let the next generation step in. But I don't believe in this, when you're old, you're not beautiful. Some of the most striking individuals I've seen are over 60 years old.
Absolutely.
It's just stunning for their natural beauty with their white hair and their lines and their life experience. I think, is it Justine Bateman that has a book out about why she's letting herself age naturally? Because your face tells the story of your life. I think that's, again, my friends, I've tried Botox, don't get me wrong, a couple of years ago. My children had no idea when I was angry at them, so I decided it wasn't for me. And I'm enjoying some of the lines on my face because I think I look like me. Whereas everyone that's making these changes, they all look the same with different hairstyles. And there's not a lot of expression, and I don't know how anyone's feeling. And I find expression and energy to be beautiful.
Energy, that's the word.
Yes.
It is. When I meet octogenarians in my office who stride in, or even if they're walking with a walker,
Yes.
and they look me in the face and they have an energy, a
Yes.
vitality, a confidence, an awareness. And there's so much about their being that
Mhm.
just is beautiful,
Yes.
sexy, alive.
Yes.
And I definitely get inspired by them because
I do too.
it's true. There are days where I wake up and I'm like, oy vey, like I
Yeah.
look that way,
Yeah.
or that's happening to my thigh or my, and trust me, I'm as vain as the rest.
Yeah.
But when I see these women, I am thrilled and
Me too.
and inspired by them because I know they also look at themselves in the mirror and moan these changes, but at the
course.
same time, they are actively participating. They are engaged. That's the
Yes.
word.
Yes,
They're engaged.
they are engaged in life. There's
Yeah.
a woman in town that stands out to me when I have this conversation. She must be in her 70s, and she always puts a little dress on, even if it's winter, and she'll have boots and a coat, and she just rides her bike all over the place. And I think that's what I want to be when I grow up. She
Indeed.
is just participating in life
Yep.
and aging, and every time I see her, I'm so much more interested in her beauty than everyone who is dressed to the nine or trying to overdo themselves, because her vitality, her life energy is stunning as she goes by on this bicycle with her hat and her helmet and her coat.
I know who you're speaking of, and it's true. She's
Who is
just
she? I want to show up at her house.
tell you off air.
I love her.
Yeah, yeah.
She inspires me every time I see her.
Yeah. Yeah. I was fortunate enough when I was growing up to have a mentor who was decades and decades older than I was. And she was not a physically beautiful woman in the standard sense. But this woman who was European, who was my piano teacher and then
Oh.
subsequently my mentor in life, had a capacity to value moments and days and years in a way that were remarkable. And maybe it was her surviving World War II.
Sure. I think perspective really
yeah.
helps. We've gained a ton of perspective, though. I think everyone needs to remember we've all just gained a tremendous amount of perspective, and we're still gaining it in the news. Wake up in the morning and remember you're alive from the pandemic. War is not within the country immediately. Like, there's a lot to just be happy about and thankful for. Not to say that days aren't difficult and you get depressed or sad or you're in pain, but there is perspective right now, a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that perspective. But it's true that we've just gone through these 3 years of such a shift and altered sense of well-being. And I wonder whether women going through the perimenopause during COVID, I have to think about that, whether I've heard less or more about the kind of physical challenges of the perimenopause in the face of the larger global challenges that we're facing.
What I have observed is that they, and including myself, because it started for me during that time, is I was less focused on it and they were less focused on it, but it doesn't go away like any sort of emotion. And I think that it sort of catches up and finds its way. And now it's presenting, it's like chasing the women to the finish line. Like, we didn't deal with this. We didn't talk about this. But for those who just coasting through it, fantastic. You don't have to suffer if you're not.
It's true that, again, women will come in and say, when am I going to have my hot flushes? And I'm like, you may
Maybe
not.
you're not.
Or
Yeah.
you may have one and that's it.
Yeah.
That not everyone is burdened by these symptoms. In fact, billions of women aren't.
Right.
We live in a country where we tend to focus on the negative, and social media tends to focus on the hardships. Exactly. But trust me, as I speak to women by the hundreds and thousands, and you too, that there are plenty of women who transition into the menopause, the postmenopause.
Effortlessly.
Indeed.
I know a few of them. They're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
I don't have my period anymore. I don't look any, I always joke and say, as long as I don't grow a beard, I'll be fine. I'll deal with it if I do. But some people just, I know women that went, yeah, it's over. And
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah. And we do have ways of dealing with the beard as well.
Oh, yeah. So I've read. That I will take action against. I'll leave my wrinkles. I'm not growing a beard.
Yeah. And I think that's a good note to perhaps end on, is that for those of you out there who are struggling, for those of you out there who are questioning, for those of you out there who are feeling alone around this, one, you're not alone. Two, there are so many resources, and hopefully there's the resource of your best friend or your neighbor or your doctor or your therapist or just your favorite health magazine.
Yeah.
That starting to read about the perimenopause can be so empowering, understanding that it's unique for every individual, that it doesn't have to be a struggle and hardship, but yet it might be.
Right.
And that it's not forever. It is not forever. It is, again,
temporary.
a transition. And that place that it's taking you to, that postmenopausal place of wisdom, of age, of new learning and creativity can be wonderful. Still challenging, but wonderful. But don't be alone out there. You can write to us here. You can ask any woman who is interested in speaking her truth, is going to share with you what she has gone through.
Yes, and I think that you'd be amazed at how many people would love to speak about it. You're standing in the coffee shop and a familiar face shows up, and if this person asks how you are and you want to say, honestly, I didn't sleep all night, I was having hot flushes, you'd be amazed how relieved someone else is to hear that type of openness about things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've always wanted to envision when I'm awake at 3 a.m., all the other ladies, my sister and I we have a code on our, are you awake?
Oh, boy.
And that there is a community of women who are howling to the moon, and
Absolutely.
how we can find a way to embrace that and all howl together. That's the purpose of this podcast. And that's my wish for all of us.
Yes. And that just reminded me of the association with the witching hour for women. Because even as a young woman, I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning in my teenage years. And I remember someone teaching me, well, you're connected to the sacred vows and the witching hour of women. And perhaps one way to look at it is like we are being woken in these hours to observe or to plan or to create versus, oh God, I'm awake and now I just need to sit here and suffer until I can fall asleep. Like it's a part of this sacred, ancient experience that has been happening for all of time. And there's a privilege to it. You could cry at night still if you have.
Yeah. I think of it often as kind of the universal breath.
That's beautiful.
That when I'm awake at 3 a.m, but my mind's racing, and often it's not. Often I'm just like, oh, I'm awake again.
Me too. I'm like, here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use a breathing technique, and I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of the 4-7-8 breathing, where you inspire in for 4 seconds, hold it for 7 seconds, and then exhale through your mouth for 8.
Yes.
And it's just a way of reconnecting to talk about the sacred. The breath is so sacred.
Yes.
And it is our life force. And thinking about it as it spirals out to all the other women who are awake with you.
Yes.
There's something really powerful about that image.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And I'm just going to add, because that, for someone who's never done that, those counts can be difficult and frustrating. Also, just if anyone wants to try the breathing, the 3-3-3 is a terrific way to start. Just breathing in with intention for 3 seconds, holding for 3 seconds, and then exhaling for 3 seconds. That's a great way to begin.
Yeah. I have been heard often saying we pant our way through life. And that if we only learn how to take deep breaths, and in fact, in the office, when I'm listening to someone's lungs and I ask them to take a deep breath in and out, I can't tell you how often I have to say, okay, you can breathe normally, because they're being so enriched by these deep inhalations and exhalations, they don't want to stop.
I believe it.
Yeah.
I quite like when I am being examined and I'm like, oh, wow, I get to actually breathe.
Yeah.
slow, and,
Yeah.
oh, I get to relax right now while I'm being in the exam room with my doctor.
Yeah.
There's something very soothing about it, but that's
Yeah.
how it should be.
Indeed. So,
Yeah.
how we can breathe deeply and exhale fully throughout our days and hours, that's some of the learning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Allison, I can't thank you enough. I'm
Oh,
always
such an
struck that
honor.
you and I could just chat for hours
Yes,
and
I'm
hours.
ready for the next. My
So
brain is like, oh, wait, hold on.
maybe I need to get you on that phone code at 3
Oh, at
a.m.
3
and go
a.m..
from there.
I'll be awake.
Yeah. Thank you also to my listeners for joining me as we venture into the limitless conversations about our bodies and the world of OBGYN. I would love to hear from you. Please email your questions and comments to comments@radiofreerhiniecliff.org or call us at 845-307-7446. Also, thank you to my producers, Jen Hammoud and Matty Rosenberg. Until our next conversation, stay healthy and stand strong in your knowledge and your insights.